of the largest man-made lakes in the world, sitting between Egypt and Sudan.
Well, to shed more light on this, we have the pleasure to have with us our dear guest, Dr. Amr Atef, the tourism expert. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Well, as we celebrate today and for the coming weeks, the flooding of the Nile and the harvest season, of course, the Nile is very important for the Egyptians, and it's an occasion or a commemoration of an event or a celebration that is very old as the land of Egypt.
That's right. On the 15th of August every year, the ceremony of the flooding of the Nile takes place, and the ceremony lasts for 2 weeks. The flooding of the Nile was poetically described in the myth of Isis' tears for her sorrow for the Osiris when he was killed by his brother Seth. So the Egyptians celebrate the flooding of the Nile every year to commemorate this mythology.
Yes. So concerning the importance of the Nile for the Egyptians through history, what would you say on this? I think we are going to write books and books.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, if you take the Nile out of Egypt, Egypt will be just a piece of desert. So the Nile is the cause of life for the Egyptians. It seldom rains in Egypt, but the Nile is our source of water. The Nile is considered to be the longest river in the world. Brings the water from Lake Victoria and Lake Albert all the way in Africa, and then goes through 9 African countries until it goes into Egypt and then into the Mediterranean.
Yes.
The word Nile came from the word Nilos, and that's a Greek word, and it means the river. So that's where the name of the Nile came from. The length of the Nile is 6,000 kilometers, 4,000 miles, and the depth is 8 meters at the deepest. The bottom of the Nile is from the south, from Aswan, all the way to Esna is granite, and from Esna all the way to Alexandria is limestone.
Yes. Okay, the River Nile, there are 11 countries that share the River Nile, and with, of course, Sudan and Egypt as the downstream countries. Give us an idea about the map.
The Nile comes from Lake Victoria and Lake Albert, and mainly Lake Albert, and then goes through 11 African countries. I mean, after North Sudan and South Sudan, so 11 African countries. So it goes through Uganda and Tanzania and the rest of the countries in Africa, and then goes into the borders between Egypt and Sudan, and then goes through the Sudanese lands, and then into the Egyptian lands, and then the Mediterranean. Yes. It's one of the few rivers that flows from south to north, and that's why we call Upper Egypt the south, and Lower Egypt the north, because of the Nile comes from up in Africa down into the Mediterranean.
Yes. Yes. Today you've just explained to us the historical idea of that Isis was crying, that is the tears on Osiris. But today we know that the flooding happens due to the between May and August there are heavy rains that falls on the highlands in Ethiopia, and then comes to be the flooding of the Nile. So, okay, this long ago also resulted in the harvest season. It was a celebration also of the harvest season.
Yes, the celebration of the harvest season comes after the flood season. And by the way, the flood of the Nile is like, the height of the flood is like 14 meters in Aswan, and around 12 meters in Luxor, and around 7.6 meters in Cairo. So that's the height of the flood when the Nile floods. And as you know, the Nile, or the River Nile, is the cause of life for the Egyptians. So we depend upon the Nile in irrigating our lands and in drinking and everything.
Yes.
So that's the cause of life, and it has been connected with, from the ancient Egyptian times up till today.
Yes. So the care and the love that the Egyptians gave to the river Nile and the connection that was started long ago since the Egyptian old civilization, the love they loved to the river Nile, knowing that it's very important for their lives and it's actually their life. So give us an idea about this picture.
Well, of course, I mean, the Nile was considered to be, for the ancient Egyptians, the vein of life, I mean, and the cause of life. And they celebrated this ceremony to commemorate the flood season, and then after that, celebrating the harvest season. They respected the Nile, and one of the questions that the ancient Egyptians believed they will be asked in the hereafter is, did you pollute the river? So that was a crime to pollute the river. And it's one of the questions that would have been asked to the deceased in the ancient Egyptian times.
Yes. So, Dr. Atef, the Egyptian civilization was established on the banks of the river Nile.
Yes.
Till now, we still have, as Egyptians, we still have this culture, we still have
Yes.
this idea, concentrating the population on the both sides of the river. And whenever we make awareness that people should go to the desert and should go to the other parts of Egypt and plant and live, yet the Egyptians are sticking to the banks of the river Nile.
Sure.
So what's your comment?
92% of the population of Egypt live on 8% of the land, which is
Yes.
the lush and vegetated parts by the banks of the Nile. And this hasn't changed since the ancient Egyptian times.
Yes.
The Egyptians are very much attached to the Nile and to the delta. The majority of the population is in the delta and by the banks of the Nile. And you see that often when you fly into Egypt. When you fly coming to Egypt or leaving Egypt, you see the lush and vegetated banks of the Nile where the Egyptians are centered or focused.
Yes. Yes, and still in Egypt, as you've just mentioned, that the Egyptians are really attached to the river Nile.
The river, up till today, from the ancient Egyptian times
Yes.
up till today.
Yes, actually it's the best going out, the best invitation on the river Nile, the best if you have an apartment overlooking the Nile. Yes, yeah. What would you say about this? Yes.
Yes, I mean up till now. I mean, if you have an apartment looking up to the Nile, or if you live by the bank of the Nile, that was still considered to be a privilege, and people still are attached to the Nile, and it's the cause of life because it seldom rains in Egypt. I mean, the rain is like 7 centimeters in Cairo a year, and like 17 centimeters in Alexandria a year, and that's about it. So that's why it's the cause of life for the Egyptians.
Yes, despite that there are 11 countries sharing the river Nile, Egyptians usually write on the Facebook or the social media as if the river Nile, we only owe the river Nile. We are the only owners of the river Nile. What would you say about this feeling that the Egyptians are really attached to the river Nile?
Herodotus, the historian, when he came to Egypt, he said that Egypt is the gift of the Nile.
Yes.
And he should have said that Egypt is the gift of the Nile and the Egyptians. Because the Nile goes through 11 countries, as you kindly mentioned, but the ancient Egyptian civilization is only found here in Egypt. And,
Yes.
and that's why the Egyptians deals with the Nile as if they own the Nile, it belongs to them, it goes in their blood.
Yes.
So they are very much attached to the Nile.
Yes.
Herodotus also said something else that's very interesting. He said that Egypt is like a candle that stays at the bottom of the Nile. When the whole area around it is dark, this candle floats on the surface of the Nile and lights the whole area around it. So that's also what Herodotus said when he came here and saw the Nile.
Yes. The Egyptian civilization is the civilization of planting, of cultivation, and that was due, of course, to the river Nile. So
Yes.
they knew when the river flooded, at what time of the year. Give us an idea about this during the ancient Egyptian time.
Okay, the Egyptians divided the year into 3 seasons. They divided the year into the inundation season, and into the growth season and the harvest season.
Yes.
In the ancient Egyptian times. And they were very much caring about keeping the Nile clean and not polluted. And they also were able to cultivate the lands and do their mathematics and know exactly when the Nile will flood.
Yes.
And that's why they had this ceremony of the flooding of the Nile on the 15th of August of every year.
Yes.
Because that's the date where the Nile starts flooding.
Yes. Actually,
there is a myth. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, actually, nowadays also in the present time and the recent years, the government or the Cairo governorate makes celebrations on the River Nile. All the governorates, I mean. On the River Nile, celebrating the flooding of the Nile. I thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your valuable information. Dr. Amra Atef, the tourism expert. Ladies and gentlemen, a short break and I'm going to be back with you.